Well, thank you all for taking a few minutes out of a busy Wednesday. I appreciate everybody coming in. I know everybody's got a lot of things to do, and COVID-19, and we're finally hopefully getting closer to being released, depending on what state you're in. I know in Connecticut today is officially reopening day. Although we were supposed to have haircuts and stuff available today, that got pushed back. So those kind of things are all out. But again, thank you for coming. And, I certainly, appreciate, I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. So, but I know for myself, this idea came from an email that Tony Roselli had sent out about a month or two ago. And I decided that I thought you guys could really benefit from hearing a lot of these types of things. And these folks have generously agreed to give their time and knowledge to you folks. And we got, I think most of you guys know all of them. We've got Ed Boyd and Zackary Fentross from Melanson Heath. We got Frank Serreti and Renee Davis from Powers and Sullivan. And we got Tony Roselli and Chad Clark from Roselli and Clark. And I guess I would say, as we have to say in all these things, the opinions given today are those of the panelists and not necessarily their firms. In my case, it will represent my firm. If I don't believe in it, who does? But that said, and it's been a privilege to work with all you guys. I know a lot of you guys are existing Odyssey clients, and I appreciate the chance you guys give all of us to work with you. And I think these guys probably share similar thoughts. So with that said, I'll let Tony kind of get going and talk about COVID-19, and then we'll get into a couple other things after that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Parker. In our house, we bought some clippers, so we all figured out how to buzz our hair, so we don't have to go to the barber. So my hair's a little shorter than it normally is right now. Yeah, so this whole COVID thing has been constantly evolving and changing. So, what we put out, I believe, on the internet, through LinkedIn, through email, probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, some of that could have already changed. Some of it could already have some clarification. So today is probably, we're as up to date as we can be. This could change tomorrow. It could change by Monday. So this is basically to provide you folks with an idea of where things stand. I've personally been involved in a lot of Zoomcasts, webcasts. The MMA had one last Thursday, which was very informative. It's on their website. In case you folks have not seen it, you should go on the website. It's got the Secretary of A&F. It has Sean Cronin, and it's got the MMA representatives from the MMA doing a nice presentation of COVID-19 and the CARES Act. I thought it was great. On Monday, there was an MAPC meeting. There was about 30 cities and towns involved. They are drafting a memo to send to the legislature to consider things for budget relief. And I'll get into some of that a little bit later after the COVID discussion. So hopefully this discussion finds to be helpful to you folks, and you can ask questions basically, and maybe at the end we can circle back and try to answer them. And all the other members of the panel, obviously, you're welcome to jump in. If we can kind of wait till the end of my discussion, that would probably be the best thing, and then we'll share opinions from the rest of the panel. So basically, the CARES Act was a provision that was enacted into law on March 27th, provided state and local government with $150 billion. That's national. Massachusetts got $2.7 billion, so that's $2.7 billion. The CARES Act allowed communities that had greater than 500,000 in population, or counties that had greater than 500,000 in population, to manage the CARES Act on their own, or to allow the state to manage the CARES Act. The city of Boston and Plymouth County chose to manage the CARES Act on their own. So if anybody in the room is from Boston or Plymouth County, I suggest you contact them as well, just to figure out what their rules and regulations are as they go through this. What I'm gonna go through is what the state put out, the Secretary of A&F put out about a week ago, and how they're going to manage this, and hopefully it's informative. But like I said, anyone from Plymouth County, you probably want to check with your Plymouth County Commissioners, Treasurer, and I believe Eric Kinshirf, I think, is kind of spearheading that for the Plymouth County. So basically, the eligible uses have to meet three conditions, the eligible uses of the CARES Act money. It has to be necessary expenses due to COVID. So that's subject to a lot of interpretation that we as a group over the last month have tried to figure out what's necessary, what's not necessary. So it was nice that the state came out with some guidelines on what they believe is necessary, and then things outside of that box need to be approved by the state. So it's nice that they did that, which leaves less judgment for we as auditors or you folks as municipal officials. It can't be part of your budget as of March 27th. So it can't be a budgeted cost, and it has to be incurred between March 1st of 2020 and December 30th of 2020. So those are basically the three requirements that must be met for your expenses. Right now, it's not eligible for revenue relief or to fill a budget gap, but that's currently under consideration, and I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. So last week, the Secretary of Administration and Finance issued a letter that they went over in this MMA Zoomcast, and the letter basically spells out the allocation to each community, and it was based on population. So if you took the total population of Massachusetts and you took, like, say, the city of Medford or the city of Malden and divided it by the total population, that's the portion that was allocated to the city. And let me backtrack. 25% of the entire amount was allocated in this round of reimbursement to cities, and then that was based on population, as I described. So if anyone's got a question on that later, we can kind of go through that math. But it's basically population divided by total mass population times the 25% or 2.7 billion. The letter basically spells out the mechanism of how to request and receive funds. It's got to be done by June 5th. Okay, so write that down on your calendars. That's about 2 weeks from now. It's web-based. So basically, communities have to estimate what they believe their 2020 direct COVID expenses are and their 2021 direct COVID expenses are. Fill it out on a form that has yet to be developed. And then there's a certification form that you need to fill out where you say, these are COVID expenses, you know, there's a whole thing. And then you certify it at the bottom. It needs to be signed by either the mayor or the town manager or whoever the CEO of the particular town or district is. It's, like I said, it's web-based. There's a guideline for eligible costs in the letter. So some are very obvious. You know, if you had to go get some PPE like masks and gloves, that's all reimbursable. If you have to sanitize your building, it's all reimbursable. Others are not quite as intuitive. You know, if you're hiring staff, can I use them? Can I not use them? Is police and fire overtime? Can I use that as an eligible cost? Can I not use it as an eligible cost? So some of that is gray, and that's explained through the letter of what is and what is not eligible. Anything outside of those guidelines, for example, I was looking at it today and I saw that unemployment was not part of the guidelines. And I think that, in my opinion, I think unemployment is a necessary expense of COVID because there's going to probably be some layoffs and there's going to be some employment costs to these cities and towns. So if you folks are going to incur a large amount of unemployment, that's something that what they're saying is if it's outside of the box, then you need to request permission from DLS to include that in your reimbursement form. So anything outside of the box like that would be included in, you know, you'd have to request, like I said, permission from DLS. So really, the state is trying to make this as efficient as possible. So what they're saying is there's other forms of grants available as well, like FEMA and some CDBG funds. There's to small businesses, there's PPP. So where the CARES Act said you could give small businesses money, the state is discouraging that and saying, you know, let's save this because we may be able to use this later if there becomes some flexibility for budgets. So let's save the money. Let's not give it to businesses right now because businesses have plenty of other ways to get money through the CARES Act, including the PPP, Payroll Protection Program, and some other things that are available to businesses. So FEMA's available for some of these items, and the state did asterisk in their letter what things they believe also qualify for FEMA. So they'd like you to apply to FEMA first, get reimbursed from FEMA, and then whatever FEMA doesn't reimburse would go through the CARES Act. Again, the state is trying to maximize the amount of CARES Act money that's left at the end of this process in case the Flexibility Act goes through, which will then allow this money to be used as a budget gap, almost like a state aid receipt. There's a smaller portion of CARES, and this would be important to the regional school districts, that's going directly through the Title I program. So that's a much smaller portion, but that's going right to the schools. It's going to the school, either the school budgets or regional school districts. And that's basically available for the same types of things. I know a lot of schools will probably be using those for Chromebooks. So like I said, they're currently discouraging CARES of local businesses and nonprofits just to maximize the amount available at the end. And what I'm doing right now is I'm advising my clients to go through their ledgers and determine what they believe is CARES and what's not CARES. So if you charge some, you know, like sanitizers and PPE and things like that to a regular budget line, make a journal entry to out of that budget line and set it up in a special revenue line that's called basically your CARES. So you'd have a CARES accounting line, a FEMA accounting line, and you would journalize expenses into those. So you'd have a deficit until you got reimbursed for those funds. But it takes it outside of the budget so that when you close the year, those costs are not included in the budget. I'm also advising my clients that when they do make that journal entry to back it up as much as possible, whether you have a contract, an invoice, a purchase order, letters from Board of Selectmen, school committees, in the case of Chromebooks, just back that expense up as best you can. And I'm also instructing my clients to put this through one individual, have one individual spearhead all this. The journal entry is made, they accumulate all the documentation, and they put it in a file that's called the CARES file. I would suggest that they scan it also into their system so that it can be disseminated electronically to us as auditors and to the state at a later date. So
Tony, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I think we're all in agreement that the accounting for this should be in a special revenue fund, but I just wanted to note that the DLS did say that they would provide further guidance down the road on how to account for this, but I think we're all in agreement that, you know, it's probably going to be special revenue fund, but just wanted to clarify that the DLS may provide some further clarification on the accounting for the CARES Act.
Yes, that's a good point, Zach. In the letter, the DLS, because it's so confusing where you have FEMA and you've got COVID, and right now everything's in the budget, it's not in a separate account. The DLS did say it will be providing more guidance on how to account for this and make it easier for them to manage and A&F to manage as well as we as auditors and the community. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Any other questions on just the CARES, or anyone want to jump in before I go into the coronavirus relief?
Hey, Tony, just a quick thing on that. I mean, just to remind people, there is a Q&A at the bottom of the screen. So if people in the audience have questions, you can certainly, you know, put those out there and we'll certainly make sure to get to them. So we won't necessarily, you know, we'll get to them when we have, you know, after Tony's done.
Tony, one more thing that might be worth mentioning on that is that they talked about A&F was going to have a bi-monthly reporting process. So And it was good. The documentation submitted was going to be similar to what people are submitting for FEMA reimbursements, just to give you an idea of the type of documentation that they're going to be looking for, and they're going to be reviewing that and verifying that you have proper documentation and that the costs are allowable to be charged to the CARES Act. So there will be like an internal review going on at ANF.
Right. No, thank you, Frank, for bringing that up. Yes, there is a 2-week monitoring process. So every 2 weeks, they're going to want updates of here's what was sent, here's how much was spent, here's what's left over. At the end of this process, if you have money left over and you haven't spent it, you have to send it back. There's also a provision that if you need cash flow, you can actually request more than what you estimate your expenses are going to be. So if you need you can use it for cash flow. But then if you don't spend it on COVID expenses, you have to send it back. So there are, the letter is, like I said, very explanatory. Parker, it may make sense to email that letter if you have it, or I can give it to you after the meeting to everyone on the call, like after our meeting, just so they have it. And read
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, if you share with me, I'll make sure that everybody in the audience gets a copy of it.
Yeah, and it's pretty detailed. It's pretty good. There are some things where they say we'll provide further guidance. So like I said, it's a virtual document. It's gonna change pretty quickly over the next week or two. But it's good to at least get it out there so that communities can start developing a framework of how to manage this. So next is the Coronavirus Relief Fund Flexibility Act. Okay, so that is a bill that was presented by John Kennedy. And it was presented on May 6th. And basically that says, hey, if we don't spend all of our CARES money, can we use it? Can we use it in the budget? Can we use it as a budget gap? It was presented on May 6th, and it was rejected by the GOP. They did not take on the bill. They voted against it. But the good news is it was resubmitted, and the White House seems to like it. I'm seeing that there's some positive feedback on it. So stay tuned on that. That's gaining traction. The MMA did bring it up last week, and that's why they're being very careful with the CARES money. Let's not just go through it all, because we may be able to give you some of this as budget relief, which would be just a godsend for a lot of communities out there that have these massive budget gaps going into 2021. So stay tuned on that. That's still out there. The other item is the HEROES Act, which was put on the floor. It was voted in by the Senate. It was presented to Congress on Monday. Basically, it's dead on arrival. But that had $1 trillion for states, counties, and local governments, basically to provide budget relief to them. The GOP, from what I understand yesterday, said they're going to take a wait and see approach. We've already done a ton of stimulus. Let's see how that's impacting things before we go vote in another $3 trillion of stimulus. I'm hoping that I don't think $1 trillion is going to get done, but I'm hoping some portion of that will become reality. Won't take that to the bank, and I won't tell my communities that I'm advising to put that in their budget. But I have a feeling, New York City has a $9 billion budget deficit as we speak, 2021. And New York City really cannot go bankrupt. If New York City goes bankrupt, it's going to cause a lot of problems in a trickle-down approach. And so I think there's going to be some sort of rescue bill approved, I would hope. Hopefully cooler heads prevail and that happens. So that's the HEROES Act. So MAPC. MAPC has been doing some budget workshops in an effort to put a packet together for the legislature to see if they'll put some laws together. And I'll quickly go over some of the things being discussed. And some of these things I don't necessarily agree with, because I'd rather see a use of free cash than some of the things on here where you kick the can down the road. But basically, one of them is to bond the deficit. So if a city has a $10 million budget deficit, can we bond it? They're asking for legislation on bonding that. And again, I'm not I'm not high on that, but if that becomes an emergency, type of procedure to use in this situation, so be it. But that's one of the things being discussed. The other thing being discussed is forbearance of the pension appropriation. So let's skip the pension appropriation this year and let's amortize it over the next 5 years. You know, it'll be paid to the retirement systems over 5 years. That will have some sort of effect on the pension assessments and liabilities and things like that. But it's another another type of avenue that was brought up. Level fund the pension basically and pick up the difference and amortize it over 3 years. That was another thing that was discussed. Also looking at revenues and seeing if you can level fund revenues, knowing that the revenues are going to be short, also amortizing that over 3 years. So there's a bunch of things here that relate to amortizing. And like I said, kicking the can down the road. And to me, if I'm managing a community, I'd probably use a portion of free cash before I started diving into these types of things. But these are the things that are being discussed. Early retirement is another one that's on the table, doing some early retirement provisions. The state, communities over $500,000 or over 250,000 can borrow from the federal loan fund. So one of the ideas was for the state to borrow from the loan fund and help out the cities and towns. So because the federal government has provided loans for communities over 250,000. One other thing, which I'm not sure will be too popular, is waive the net school spending requirement. I don't think that one will fly, but that was one of the suggestions. Allow select boards to approve budgets was another thing, just to make the town meeting or the approval of the budget process more efficient. Right now, they're talking about going out to football fields with senior citizens and putting them 6 feet apart and raising your hand or whatever. And so those are a few of the things that are being kicked around. And some other things I want to talk about real quickly before I turn it back over. Talk to some of the bond rating agencies, and they are not going to penalize you if you use your rainy day fund, because it's pouring right now. So if you use your rainy day fund, as long as you have a plan to replenish that, the bond rating agencies are not going to penalize you. I mean, there could be an overall pressure on the bond rating depending on what happens in the economy due to COVID, but not as a specific reason of a community using their rainy day fund, which would be stabilizations or free cash. Second, a lot of my towns that when I review their ledgers, have a lot of stagnant accounts in special revenue, haven't been used for years. Scour through those and see if there's anything that you could use in some of those gift accounts, some of those old grant accounts that were just sat on the books, never got used. Sit with the department heads, see if you can use some of that to help out your budget. Capital projects, plenty of capital projects that I look at have like $8,000 left, $4,000 left. They got a few $1,000s left where the project just didn't use all the money and it kind of sits on the books. You can use up to $50,000 to pay debt out of those capital projects. So you can appropriate directly from there to pay debt. So that's $50,000 if somebody needs that sort of help. Or you can repurpose those. If there's some capital type items in your budgets, you might be able to repurpose those to the capital projects. So I'll turn it over to the panel if you've got any comments, but that's my discussion.
Okay, thanks. So I didn't see any questions yet. What I want to do is, I know we had a few questions come in ahead of time related to remote auditing and how we're addressing it and some of the challenges we may see, what we're going to do going forward. If there's nothing else in between, I'm going to jump right into that. I have questions in the chat open, so if anybody wants to interrupt me, feel free.
Renee, just one quick thing before you get going. I was going to put out a poll here, and all the polls are anonymous, so no one's going to know how you answered. We're just going to figure out what you guys think is going to impact your organization in terms of COVID-19 costs. How much you guys are going to spend? I mean, it might be helpful for some of you other towns to know what your peers expect. And I'll let Renee get back to what she's doing. We'll just leave the poll open for a little bit so you guys can all vote.
Okay, thanks, Parker.
Yep.
So those of you who do not know me, my name is Renee Davis. I'm a partner with Powers and Sullivan, and that is all that we do, our municipal audits. So we are very used to spending the majority of our time at client sites doing audit procedures and spending time with our clients. We found ourselves a few months ago, like everybody else, in a very different situation where our clients were closing down, and we felt it necessary to have our staff work from home for the past 8 or so weeks. To be able to do that, we really had to start thinking differently about what we could do and what we could not do to keep our audits proceeding remotely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you may have seen, what you have to consider, some of the risks related to remote auditing. You really need to take a look at what your auditors are doing and how you can best get information to them. One of the things would be making sure that you have a secure platform. So I know we, and most CPA firms at this point, have a secure portal. If you haven't been taking advantage of that in the past, you need to now. Email is just not secure enough to transfer most of your audit information. Be very aware of sharing with your auditors and send it through a secure portal, and or what we've been utilizing a lot is getting access to our clients' files remotely. So read-only access, we can't make changes to it. We can only use it to be able to access your documents so that we're not just pushing documents back and forth. What we have found over the past couple of months, we've been doing preliminary, what we call prelim audit work for most of our municipal year-end June 30th clients, but we've also been doing, I'm going to say, the real year-end audit work. We do a lot of the retirement systems, and they had December 31st year ends. We have found, being resourceful, to say the least, that we've been able to accomplish most, if not all, of our audit procedures remotely. I will not say that I love this. I like to go spend time with my clients. I think that you get a lot in personal interaction. And although I've spent my fair amount of time on Zoom with clients, and I've done audit committee meetings, I've done exit conferences and so forth, we've been able to do the procedures that we've needed to do, and I'm going to say both preliminary and year end, for the most part, with clients, with some exceptions. So some of the struggles that we've heard and some of the comments that we got were, one, our clients aren't there, right? So they've all been working from home too, or in some communities, they're going in 1 or 2 days a week just to get the bills paid or just to sign documents. And for them to be able to get us our requested documents, so if we're doing transaction testing, they have to give us support for journal entries, payroll information, schedules of bills, etc. For them to be able to scan that information and get it back to us has been an undue burden on them at a time that they have way bigger things to be concerned with. So, what we're suggesting here, a lot of people have done it. A lot of people are finding ways to be able to scan documents efficiently and effectively. What some of the federal guidelines are certainly saying that a proper use for this CARES Act money is to be prepared to do things remotely. To continue your operation. So if you have CARES Act, I know just to tail on what Tony was talking about, they're telling you to use this for what you need to use it for right now for COVID-19 related expenses. I would really argue that the ability to be prepared to have your year-end audit done remotely is real. Right now, people are just opening up. People are just coming back to work a little, if ever. We don't know what's going to happen. I think you need to take the opportunity with this federal funding that's available. If you weren't ready to have your prelim audit work done remotely, be ready for it come fall or come year end when your auditors are going to come back in. But it's gone pretty well for us. We have found that communities that didn't necessarily give us everything remotely before, they're doing it now. They're finding a way. So, you know, there were always concerns, and one of my concerns was if I'm not there, if I don't show up at town hall and I'm not sitting there looking face to face with my client, am I less likely to discover fraud or malfeasance or any mistakes that are made? And the reality of it is most audit work now is us looking at supporting documentation and understanding your system of internal controls. So I think communication is important. So just emails is not enough. I think sometimes the Zoom calls are really helpful. I think phone conversations. So we're doing a lot of phone calls, a lot of Zoom calls, making sure that we are staying in touch, that we know what's going on. There are new challenges for all of our municipalities right now. Tony talked about this. I have towns that can't hold a town meeting. How do they manage their budget? I have towns that have really big budget problems because of this. We're learning day to day what federal funding will be available to them and how they can use it. And we're trying to work with them to make sure that they're taking advantage of that to the biggest extent possible, while not being foolish, because there's a good chance that you're going to be able to use it next year as revenue replacement. So maybe it's easier to observe some of your reactions or your body language if we're there. It's not impossible to do it remotely if it is the safest practice and if we have to. So what we've been doing, I'm going to say being resourceful. One of the things that we do for some of our clients is the physical inventory count. And we are checking with them. If our clients are letting us out to go out and do the physical inventory, we're scheduling that. We're going to wear masks. We have gloves, et cetera. We're keeping 6 feet apart from each other. Zach actually brought up a good point with this. If you're not able to do it, different communities have different levels of security or levels of comfort. And if you're not able to do it, you could technically do it with a Zoom call, right? Or a Zoom call or some kind of, we can see that, we have your inventory list, you show us that, and you're walking around with it, right? That was probably the most challenging piece of it. Some communities just don't have things scanned in. We have, I'm going to give you a real life example. One of our audit clients is one of the soldiers' homes that had a really bad outbreak, very sad situation. And they have documents, real paper documents that they need for us to audit, and they're not scanned in and they don't have the staff to be able to do it. So these are the problems that we're running into. How do we get that safely? How do we make sure there's no risk to our auditors that when they go to look at that? What do we do for timing? I'm not a doctor, I'm watching the news every day, and I'm watching the federal and state requirements and listening to the CDC, but it's a really scary time. So, we're shipping things, we're holding things, we're really managing that in the craziest way ever imaginable. So what we've found is that most of it can be done one way or the other, and you really need to work with your audit. So if you find that you don't have the ability to scan documents well, so we're talking warrants, support for warrants, journal entries, it's the time for you to consider changing that. And we talked about tight budgets, but right now you have this CARES Act funding available to you, and that would be an acceptable use. In my opinion, that would be an acceptable use of that money to make you prepared for this situation now, or if it comes back in the fall, or in the future. So think about that. We do have some clients that say, hey, we just can't get there. We don't have the manpower right now to scan that for you. We do have people going out and picking up documents, bringing them back, auditing them, bringing them back to the client. It's not perfect. There is risk there. There's risk that something happens to your documents when I have them. It's real, and we're managing that. We're making sure the time that we keep them is very limited, that we're returning them in the same, the same order, and security, right? So now we've sort of pawed through your documents, and we're going to return them to you, and you're going to file them. So we really have to make sure that we're taking all necessary precautions for our people as well as for your documents, and we're going through that. So I would take a look at I would take a look at your technology. I would take a look at your resources. I would argue also that if you don't have the manpower or people power to be able to prepare for your audit because of COVID, that you could beef that up even using these funds. These funds, they're a little bit, there's some certain things that you'd have to get approval from the DOR, but they're pretty broad, and that they want you to be able to not miss a beat due to COVID. And the fact that we've all been working from home, and the fact that town halls have not been open is all due to COVID. So just, you got to kind of think outside the box, and I think work with your audit firm to make sure that happens. We have been having a lot of conversations here about when do we go back out to clients. If they're not comfortable with us going there, what do we have to do? And are we prepared even in the fall to not go there? Some people are going out to clients now. I was, as these guys know, I was at a client Monday and Tuesday, a retirement system. They don't have things scanned in. They wanted us to finish the audit. We went in with masks, with gloves. We did 90% of the audit from back at the office. We went in only to do what absolutely had to be done there in the field. In those 2 days, it was good to be able to see my client, but we really had to take all the necessary precautions. So I mentioned use secure web portals whenever you can. Make sure you have the ability to be prepared, scanning documents if you can. We have to make sure that we are documenting any changes in your internal control. So be prepared to tell us, have you changed your processes, right? So maybe now all your meetings are on Zoom because nobody's meeting in person. Who's signing now? Who signed before? Who's signing now? Are you going to electronic signatures for some of your approvals where you weren't before? That's something that your auditors need to know because it's part of our risk assessment. It's how we plan our audit. And very important, is it a permanent change that you're making? And do you still have the same amount of control over those transactions that you did before? So making sure that you're not at higher risk, the what ifs. I would certainly, if you don't have a good IT department or a good IT risk assessment process, I would think about that as you're going forward. So if you're going to e-signatures, what are the risks that something goes wrong there? We're on Zoom right now. I know that there have been some Zoom meetings that have gotten hacked. So, what information are you talking about on a Zoom call? This is fine, but if it was needed to be a more secure call, we probably wouldn't do it through Zoom. Maybe we would go through Microsoft Teams or something to that effect. So just be aware of the IT risks that are out there. Some transactions are happening electronically now that didn't before. So even before this happened, these guys can attest to a lot of cities and towns were getting, I'm going to say hacked, right? So the emails were getting hacked. There were some payroll scams that were going on. We are probably more ripe for that now than ever. Don't let your guard down. Don't poo-poo the fact that you have to keep up with your IT training, your security protocols over IT. Right now, a lot of people are communicating even just via email, but where before they were in the next office and there's email communication, do not make big financial moves based solely on an email without actually talking to that person or seeing them. So very, very, very important. And I'm nervous for what possibly could happen. So looking at, putting together your financial statements, proposing some entries, checking your accruals, getting your pension information together, all of that, we can do it from our living rooms at this point. We're all in the cloud. We can, that's the easy part. Most of the paperwork part of it, we don't need to be sitting there in your offices, but there are new risks that we're concerned with, mostly related to not seeing you in person, not getting those cues, missing maybe those conversations that we would have. So we need to make sure we stay in touch and that we understand what securities and changes that you have in place. So again, just to sort of wrap up, I know there were some questions out there. I want to make sure that I answered any questions related to that. Suddenly I can't see the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to come out with them. And what I would suggest for any of you, talk to your auditors. Make sure that you're having conversations now about what you're comfortable with as far as them being on site. If you have protocols, you want to make sure that you can space them out. Sometimes we're not, right? Sometimes we're crammed in as auditors. And maybe we make changes. Maybe we don't have as many staff come out at once. Maybe you limit the days that we can come out, or limit the staff that you're even going to have there the days that we come out, just to keep everybody safe as we get through this and to continue to be able to, what we don't want to do is get behind, right? We want to be timely with the audits as much as we can. So anything else on that, guys?
I'll jump in there, Renee. No, Renee, I think you highlighted things really well there. And Tony, to go back to something that you said earlier and piggybacking on Renee, I think we just need to kind of take a step back and again, be creative and be adaptable. And there might be a silver lining to this too, because I think in certain situations we can just, we become accustomed to what we're used to, and there might be a way for us to revisit or reevaluate the audit process with our clients. And again, I think it just goes back to think with the end in mind, set the expectations. What are the needs of the community? When do you need financial statements? And then try to walk things back. And from there, we can build a game plan, if you will. And given that there's some uncertainty around whether it's availability of records, availability of personnel, and different timing issues, we can tailor that to each other. And I think it just speaks to what Renee is saying. Let's just be in constant communication. Let's set up that game plan. We can phase things out as needed. We can be flexible. I think this is something that all of us and many local governments in Massachusetts have been really aiming at over the last handful of years. So I think the large majority are set up to be able to deal with the remote environment. And yeah, there's going to be some differences there, but again, I think it's set the expectations, and who knows, things may be a little bit more fluid as the audit process is potentially a little bit more tailored to your environment, your situation. I think you're on mute, Frank.
I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I also just wanted to talk a little bit about what can be done to prepare for something like this if it happens again, and the fact that there seems to be some money out there related to COVID, which should probably be confirmed with DLS before going forward with this, but there's some money there for accelerated telework capacity and hardware, which could potentially be used to build systems to be prepared for this type of thing in the future. Some of our clients right now with Munis and also with Infinite Visions, I believe they also have the ability to, they're scanning invoices in now when they're processing the warrants and processing batches for payments. So that information is already there electronically in their system. They're also putting in support for journal entries and other bank statements. They can put support in for revenue transactions. And all of that, I mean, those are some of the most cumbersome areas, I think, as far as like information that we're requesting for the audit. And so if that information was being put in like as you go, that might be something that you want to consider using these funds to invest in, is to get those processes in place if you have those systems. And then another topic that came up was for the systems that don't have that capability. And Chad can probably talk a little bit more about this, but possibly scanning, all the invoices for a warrant and putting them out on the cloud. And Chad mentioned a product that they've used before. I think it's Microfiche, and he can talk a little bit how that works. But that's another option too, where you can actually have them come in and scan documents for you to get caught up. Because another area that can be pretty cumbersome is when we're looking at the employee files or the retirement files to take a look at the data that has to be given to the actuaries for the census data. We have to test that data, and those files have to be pulled. If that information could also be scanned, and an outside company like Microfiche could come in and do that for you, and they have an organized file structure, we could get remote access to it. We would no longer have to ask you to be pulling all these transactions, and that would just take a huge amount of work, tedious work, off of you and your staff's plate for the audit. So that's, I think, would be a great use of these funds if that would be an allowable use. And Chad, I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit more onto that about that product.
Sure, I can, Frank. The product actually, the one that we used was called Laserfiche.
Yeah.
And it was really, it's a software program that's designed to be a database where you can scan different documents in, that scans them in as a readable PDF. So you can search. If you scanned in 1,200 pages of documents, once it's scanned, you can do a keyword search and find the name of the vendor or the amount you're looking for real quick like that. So it's got some, it's got some long-term benefits to implementing an online scanning process. If you're trying to find an invoice later on for your own purposes within your town hall. It could do that, but it's a managed database where you can set up folders and subfolders. Doesn't require any kind of real special hardware. It installs on a PC. Any decent scanner will work. You know, so it's not overly cost prohibitive. I think when we looked into it about half a dozen years ago, I think it was somewhere around $15,000 for the software and the scanner. But in addition to that, one of their services that they offered, and Frank mentioned it, is you can hire them to do the scanning for you if it's a matter of you don't have the people in your office right now, but you really want to get caught up and you want to implement it. You can arrange to have their people do the scanning. You know, so it's just one product. That happens to be one that I know of. It works. Years later, we still use it, the PDFs, to search some of our old records. But I agree. You know, some of the software like Munis has that option built into it. A lot of the software vendors do not have a scan and attach function built into it right now. So if you're on one of those other software vendors for your GL, you would have to look to, you know, outsource it through another software program anyway. And this is a good time to have someone else pay for it and get it implemented. Because the truth is, you know, whether it's happening now because of the issues going on with COVID or not, if any of the auditing documentation that we're getting as firms is indicating that most audits in the next 5 years are going to become extremely electronic, less people out in the field, more data exchange. And a lot of our clients have been slowly moving there, but this was going to be something that was going to be coming anyway. It's probably just been put into high gear because of the situations we're in. So, you know, when you're looking at it and talking about it within your town halls, you were going to be asked by your CPA firms in the future to do something like this, not that far down the road.
Thank you, Chad.
If I can just jump in for 1 minute, I was looking at some of the questions that were out there, and one of them was about making recommendations for town meeting. So I think everybody here probably has read the Division of Local Services guidelines related to the 1/12 budget. If you can't hold a town meeting by June to get your budget approved, you have to go through this process with what they call a 1/12 budget. It is, if you don't know, not so easy as just you get to spend 1/12 of last year's budget. You have to go through a month-by-month approval process with the DOR for that. So if you think you're not going to find a way to hold town meeting by June 30th, I'm encouraging my clients to try to, and I think everybody wants to if they can do it safely. But if you can't, then you need to go to this Plan B, and they're making an allowance for that. But you need to be able to estimate, and you should be prepared for this, not just I need to spend 1/12 of my general fund operating budget from last year, but what are those other bills or assessments that you have to pay in July? So we'll start. So in June, you would have to get it certified for July. In July, a lot of people have one-time payments that they make. There are some stipends that get paid. There are some assessments that get paid. Those organizations that you're paying are kind of banking on you getting that money to them. So you need to, you know, you might have debt service payments that are coming to play. So you're going to have to estimate. So you're going to have to do some real planning to be able to go to the DOR a month ahead of time, put it in through Gateway, have them approve your 1/12 budget for the next month for you to legally be able to spend that. And then if you still don't have a town meeting by the end of July, you're going to have to go do the same thing for August. So just to kind of follow up, I know Catherine, hi Catherine, Catherine asked a question about that. I think people are trying to be as resourceful as they can to get the town meetings done in June if there's any way possible, because it really, from an accounting standpoint, how you actually even put that budget into your accounting system, how you control the budget, you know, as it's approved on a 1/12 basis is going to create more work for you. So don't don't underestimate that, but we see the challenges. And I think DLS would love you to get it done before June 30th, but they understand that everybody can't. So,
Hey, guys,
and
Ed, do you want to talk pensions and OPEB?
Sure thing. Everyone's favorite topic, pension and OPEB.
Sure as it is. It's always our dream scenario.
I'm preaching to the choir here. No, thank you, Parker. So essentially, we wanted to talk about pension and OPEB, particularly given what has happened, with the pandemic over the last, seems like 6 months, but call it 2.5 months now, and the impact in the adverse market and its direct relation to pension and OPEB. And, what I hope we can also kind of put into perspective here, similar to, I think what we all do when we have our exit conferences is just to provide some context here too, because we can't lose sight of the fact that while they do tend to be front and center, these are long-term liabilities and should be managed accordingly. Certainly things can happen in the short term that do have some ramifications, but certainly don't want to lose sight of that. Now, I can share with you that looking at my personal retirement account and having some conversations with Parker, we're probably looking at an average loss on investment of roughly 10% right now. That may be even conservative. That is going to have a direct impact on your net OPEB liability, along with your net pension liability. Now, again, we've talked about these long-term liabilities, and over the last handful of years now, you've probably become more familiar with the terms deferred outflows and deferred inflows. So what's happening right now is not necessarily going to be recognized, in next year's financial statements, but it is going to have, an overall effect that's going to be phased in. And what you're also going to see is that is going to then have a trickle down effect into other things that we'll get into here. And in talking with Parker, the most notable change now is probably going to be addressing the discount rates. It looks like PERAC has reduced their target rate down to about 7%. Now we have a number of clients who have been pretty proactive over the last handful of years of coming down from the 8% to the 7.75s, 7.5s, what have you, and that's likely to be reevaluated again, given what we're seeing in the market here. And we don't have a crystal ball, but the good thing with pension, at least, is that the time of the year where this is happening, most of the retirement systems, well, I think all the retirement systems are 12/31 year end. So I guess depending on what your outlook is, between now and 12/31, there are likely to be some ebbs and flows, hopefully to the good, but I guess being objective about it, it could go either way. But I guess there, maybe not a silver lining, but there's still some ability to potentially recoup some of these losses, compared to where we're at today. On the OPEB side of things are a little tighter because the plan year end is going to be most local governments' fiscal year end, which is June 30. I think there's going to be a little less flexibility with market turning around between now and then. In addition to that, on the discount rate on OPEB plans, because of some, maybe funding just starting over the last couple of years, the municipal bond rate index has been utilized as the discount rate, or for other communities, it's been a part of the blended rate. And in talking with Parker earlier, it looks like that closed around, was it 2.69%, Parker?
6.8 last night, which is down about 10 basis points from last June 30th.
So what we're looking at here is collectively for both pension and OPEB is that your discount rate, your investment rate of return is likely to go down on some level. And in turn, what does that mean? That means your liabilities are are likely to go up without even potentially considering other changes to other assumptions and mortality tables. Further down the line on that, we've talked about some of the issues that have come up with local governments facing, revenue shortfalls and, potentially needing to make some challenging decisions. Now on pension, and Renee was speaking earlier on the 112 budget, it does sound like a lot of local governments are still, looking to make their pension assessments in July to the extent practical. I think there's still some, evaluation of cash flow that's going to be done there. But one thing I want to point out to the group is PERAC did issue memo number 22, and essentially what they allowed the boards, I believe it's at the board's discretion. So I'm encouraging the local government folks to look to the board, but essentially they've waived the I guess not getting the discount or the interest for making payments not in July. So essentially you're still able to pay in installments, but get the discount as if you were paying in July. So I think that's important to note. And again, something that could have an impact to the pension system instead of getting that money in July, and be able to invest accordingly. If that's going to be scattered throughout the year, there's going to be some ramifications there. But again, I still think it's a good element of flexibility to provide to the communities, and with the level of uncertainty that we have here. On OPEB, it's tough to say where communities are going to fall, but in all likelihood, what's being contributed to the trust additional is likely to be scrutinized, given that there's going to be other tough decisions to make. When you're debating on laying off teachers and police officers, funding OPEB, I don't think becomes a high priority. So there are some impacts to the contributions and what the funding is going to be into these plans. Now, again, kind of following down that trickle-down effect, what we're seeing here is the liability is likely going up. Now, Tony mentioned earlier in a meeting that we've been pretty fortunate over the last 10 years to see some pretty consistent growth, and I think in turn we've seen it with a lot of the pension plans, and that the funded ratio is going up, and in many cases the funding schedules pretty much staying at not really being pushed out, and each year you get closer and closer to being fully funded. And in line with that thinking, once the pension plan has been fully funded, the goal has been to essentially take that appropriation into the pension fund and move that over into OPEB here. Let's talk about some specifics, but I think what we're going to be looking at here is that clients are going to have to go back and evaluate that funding schedule and really understand what, how are you going to revise that, given probably where we end up come June 30 and then 12/31. Parker, do you want to maybe speak to what that might do to the funding schedule?
Yeah, I mean, for the OPEB plans, I mean, we put up a poll, and about those who are funding, about 60% said they'll stay the same, and 40% said they will either skip or reduce for this year, for those who are actually funding. That will certainly impact things. The question is, is this a one-off or is this an ongoing thing? So that's really the ultimate question here. If you tell me that this is, hey, we're skipping a year, we're going to be right back at it next year, we're going to make up for it. I think, I can't speak for the audit community, but I think the rating community would look at that as, listen, stuff happens and we move on. If this becomes, all right, we've just given up on funding, at least for the next 4, 5, 6 years, whatever, and we'll deal with it later, we're going back to PAYGO, or we're going to start tapping the trust and break the glass, that changes things. So I think, this is a one-off, we need to reset and then go forward from here. I don't think you're going to have any huge impacts, but I think, again, the discount rate is down slightly. The market is down 10% in the first quarter. It's been back a lot in the last 6 weeks. So we'll see how that plays out. We get to June 30th, we'll see kind of where we stand there. I don't think it's going to, all in all, if you were to maintain your funding, I think your discount rate will stay reasonably close to where it was last year, all things equal. But that presupposes you maintain your funding, which again, 40% of people have said they're not going to. And then the question is, again, whether it's a one-off or not. So, and the other real quick thing on OPEB, Ed, is just an anomaly of COVID-19 is while you say, gee, COVID-19 is really going to jack up my healthcare costs. It doesn't, it doesn't. I mean, one of the things you'll find right now is actually insurance companies are having to rebate and or cover additional services because they're not spending any money. Because if you don't have COVID-19, you don't go to the hospital. You think you're having a heart attack or a stroke, you don't go, you stay home. Your ankle injury or whatever it is. And so healthcare costs are actually right now down significantly. So I know renewals just all got released for the coming year, so that won't impact there. The question is going to be, when do people start going back to the doctor and going back to hospitals for the quote unquote elective procedures? But right now, healthcare costs are way down. So again, we'll
Parker,
see.
can I interrupt a second? I had a question that you're talking about from a client. What about the impact of the people who once they open up the testing to see if you have COVID antibodies and stuff like that? There's the concern that there's going to be a large increase of people just going to get tested once that becomes, or going to get the immunity shot once it happens. What are you hearing about what that may do to costs?
Oh, I mean, that will definitely impact costs, no question about it. The question is whether or not, I mean, right now, as I understand it, the insurance companies have to basically cover these things at no cost to the person. But as you've seen, well, again, I don't know about in the Boston Globe, but I can tell you in the New York Times and the Washington Post both had it. And I know Governor Baker is frustrated by this. There's a lot more tests than there are people willing to take tests. So the question is, are people going to start being willing to take the test? Right now, people aren't. So that's really going to be the question is, does that change? And as we get to, and I can just tell you this from my own team, we talked about it because here CVS is doing a drive-through thing where people get testing. And not a single person in my team had any interest in doing it. Now, if it was an antibody test, all of them were interested. None of them were interested in doing a test by itself. So I think that's going to be the question is if and when antibody tests become available, then I think that will definitely start increasing that cost level. Because I know some initial studies were major increases in costs for COVID, and that part is true. They just didn't take into account the reduction in all the other costs they're not seeing.
Thanks, guys. Does that answer your question, Chad? Or?
Yeah, it did. I thought it was I hadn't really considered it, and I thought everybody was concentrating on the fact, like Parker had said, that nobody's really going to a hospital right now if they can avoid it. But there was a concern in the community that there might be a very quick ramp up of elective type of, not elective surgery, but elective type of testing to see where they ended up with COVID or things like that once it became available.
Okay, just getting back to, kind of maybe summarizing what, where we left off there. And, ultimately, trying to look at this from a conservative standpoint, there's likely to be some sticker shock when it comes to these liabilities. But I think context is needed. These have been big numbers for, out there for a handful of years, and it's still going to be like that. And, in trying to see what this is going to do from a bond rating perspective. Some of us talked earlier, and, I think there's going to be more weight, as Parker and Tony said, really in the general fund and really in the revenue reduction, and not have a heavy focus on NPL in OPEB. Again, it's still an element of the financial statements that is, very much worth talking about, and again, needs to be managed, and communities need to be proactive about it. But, I think we also need to, we need to think about, year-to-year operations as well, and continuity of services. And, I think that's likely to, to get most of the attention. Now, one thing in relation to certain pension valuations, going back to the remote auditing and you know, trying to utilize electronic means and paperless sharing if possible. PERAC is a little bit limited in what they can do because of the sensitivity of you know, the data that we're working with here. So from what I understand, they've been very limited in being able to move forward with their 1/1/2020 valuations. So as a you know, as a way to move forward for the financial statements, they've, you know, been in touch with the audit community about rolling forward or double rolling the 1/1/18 valuations. Now, that is something that is permissible under GASB 68 because the valuation date needs to be within 30 months and a day of your fiscal year end. So for June 30, 2020 year ends, a 1/1/18 valuation isn't an issue. Now, you could make the case that it's inconsistent with how your valuations have been measured since the inception of GASB 68, meaning it's a valuation, a roll forward in the interim year, and then a new valuation. Technically, I believe that's a change in accounting principle that might need to be dealt with a little bit differently, but I think we're trying to take a practical approach to the situation. And, you know, I'll speak for myself, but I think in talking with the audit community, it's something that we're not really going to bat an eye at. We're not going to have an issue with. However, because the housing authorities are also member units of the retirement systems, there's potential that they may fall outside that 30 months and a day window because they have fiscal year ends in September and in December. So we, as part of our Mass Society Governmental Accounting and Auditing subgroup, we've tried to get the housing authorities involved and try to determine, you know, whether or not there are going to be some roll forward issues. So I guess, you know, it does seem to be minimal, but I guess to the folks that are out there, you know, maybe just try to understand, you know, the housing authority, what their year end is and what the potential impact to them is going to be, because in turn, if they have to use the 1/1/18 valuation date, it's likely that they're going to have a qualified opinion.
And that will also impact most of your enterprise funds as well, be it light departments, water departments, things like that.
True. So there are some considerations that need to be made instead of just saying, yeah, just roll it forward. So just again, you know, see who the players are, what the units are, as far as those valuations go, and you know, and then try to make a decision, you know, based on the needs of those parties. Lastly, I just really wanted to bring up, you know, while we're on the subject of valuations, folks that need updated OPEB valuations. Not really knowing how accessible the data is, how easy it's going to be to share the census data between the actuary. I think it's imperative to start working on this now. And again, going back to what I was saying, laying the foundation or setting up that game plan, you know, understand when you're going to need financial statements and try to see how this is going to come together. This might be a non-issue. I'm hoping it is, but, you know, I'm foreseeing there may be some potential challenges given the sensitivity of the data, the accessibility of it. So I think just, you know, for those who need an updated valuation for their fiscal 20 audit, I would just encourage you to start, you know, thinking about that now. You know, maybe get in touch with your audit firm, get in touch with your actuary, which is likely Parker. So, you know, I just think that will help smooth things out for us in the fall, and not have a delay in your issuance of financial statements.
I promise I did not prompt him to ask that question.
He did not.
Thanks for bringing that up, Ed. Some of my clients have a difficult time getting us the OPEB in a normal situation. And then it's time for the audit to be finalized, and we're like, hey, we don't have the OPEB yet. So in this type of environment, it's really, really important. Right now, everyone's saying, hey, I want to worry about COVID and all this. But then all of a sudden in November, they'll say, hey, where's my audit report? Because the audit report becomes important. And really to start thinking about adding that to your plate now about how to get that completed and work with your actuaries to get that done. Because I'd hate to be in a situation where we get all these audits done and we're just waiting for months, waiting for the OPEBs, because now the actuaries are going to be backed up because all of a sudden everyone's going to ask Parker and whoever else does your OPEB valuations, and they're going to have like 30 of them to do like in overnight. So so I'm glad you brought that up, Ed. It's really important to you know, see if you can create a game plan to get that OPEB done.
Well, thank you everyone for the time today. And thank all these panelists for the time they've generously devoted. I mean, it's been very helpful, hopefully for all of you. I know there is one question out here Eric had submitted about, is the March 31st deadline for single audits for 2021 going to be extended for fiscal 20 audits? I don't know if any of you guys can answer that.
I don't think it has yet.
Okay.
Renee, I actually think it was extended by 6 months.
Yeah, I
I could be
believe so
wrong in
too.
that, but I believe that I read that it was extended out an additional 6 months, but they said that that was subject to change.
All right.
I'm pretty sure I saw the same things there.
I saw September 30th as the new deadline for the single audits for 20. That's what I saw. I'm hoping GFOA.
Well, then we're on the same page then.
Yeah, I'm hoping
Yeah, I do.
GFOA.
I see it.
Give
It
the
is
CAFR.
6 months. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully GFOA does the same thing with the CAFRs, because that's going to be a tough schedule to meet also, December 31. So,
Fingers crossed, Tony.
yeah.
And
Also
just-
on the single audits, obviously these a lot of these funds are going to be federal, and it just to let everybody know, it will impact what maybe has traditionally been the programs we look at as auditors for your single audit. And that's why, like, when we say you know, document, you know, very clearly what's CARES, what's FEMA, how it relates to COVID, it's because those are the kind of questions we're most likely going to be asked as auditors in the compliance supplement to verify with you all as clients, like, how did that expense relate to a COVID situation? If you've already got it documented on, say, like, you know, if you do a spreadsheet that lists out all your expenses and you have a little comment section next to it saying, you know, this was for PPE over in the fire department, it's going to make the single audit go that much easier for you as clients. Plus, it's not going to, you know, by the time we get in and do the single audits, this is going to be probably feel like a lifetime ago. The transactions we're asking about happened, and it'll prevent you all from having to like scramble to be like, oh yeah, what was that all about again? The other thing I would say is bear with us as auditors. The federal government has come out and said that they're not going to provide us with compliance supplements on these grants until September at the earliest. So if you ask us right now, like, oh, so what are you going to be looking at relative to the, you know, for the single audit? We've got ideas we can guess about, but we ourselves aren't going to really have an answer for you for a few months from now. So it's hard for us to provide that guidance with full authority and knowledge. So just something to keep in mind, please.
Oh, that's great.
One last thing, Chad, thanks for bringing that up. One of the things I noticed, there was a lot of smaller towns on the participant list, towns that are not used to having a single audit. Just remember that the threshold is $750,000 in federal expenditures. So keep an eye on that, because this COVID, those that were close in the past, this COVID money could kick you into a single audit situation that you're unaware of. So make sure you're working with all with your audit firms to understand if you need a single audit in 2020 or 2021 or not. That's pretty important. You don't want to find out at the last minute that you need a single audit. You kind of need to plan for that.
Yeah, and for clarity on that, that's $750,000 in total grant expenditures, not just COVID. You know, so you got to look at everything: school lunch, CDBG, special ed, Title I, you know, police grants when you're trying to do that analysis. So
The one other final, I'm not sure if we mentioned this or not, was the GASB extension. So the GASB has extended implementation of new standards, almost all of them for a year, a couple of them slightly shorter than that. But at least the one positive out of this is we're not going to have to deal with any new GASB implementations this year.
And just a quick thing for everybody. I'll just tell you folks who are in the audience, you know, we're here to obviously serve you folks. And I know I've worked with Bartholomew, Pars, and Rockland to see if I can get them to come on here and teach you guys or explain to you guys a little about what's going on in the market. I know we're working with Blue Cross to see if they can come out and tell you guys about what's driving healthcare costs. We've contacted Richard Neal's office on Ways and Means to see if we can get someone to come and talk about the HEROES Act and CARES 2. We're working with Chuck at Bartholomew. We're supposed to do a presentation with S&P, so we're trying to see if we can, at MCTA, so we're trying to see if we can duplicate that. And basically any other topics that you guys would find interesting, let us know. We're happy to go get the experts and bring them to you guys. I mean, that's why we're here. We want to, in this environment, we want to do whatever we can to make sure we're serving you guys. So if there's things we can do, let me know. I'm happy to, you know, get the people and bring them to you guys. So, and with that, I mean, that's pretty much all I've got. I appreciate all these folks taking the time and all of you folks for attending. And again, if there's anything we can do, certainly reach out and we'll certainly get you a recording of the webinar here. And if you couldn't make it, and again, if there's anything else we can do, Tony, I know he's going to provide that one letter. We'll get that out to you guys as well. Thank you all again.
Great. Thank you.